Galatians 6, and we're still thinking about that one responsibility that we all share when we belong to the family of God, when we're sharers in that inheritance and have received the gospel through the Spirit. The first part, we were thinking about the way in which we have a responsibility to one another when it comes to sin and rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness, spurring one another on toward love and good deeds. This time, though, we're going to turn to something that may help us quite a lot in the coming months. As you pick it up in Galatians 6 verse 2, you'll see there that Paul talks about a particular responsibility we have for one another. He writes to the churches, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." He goes on to explain that it's really going to be unhelpful to have an arrogant attitude and feel like it's going to be beneath you to do things for others. There is a poor form of pride that causes us to imagine that we should really be served rather than being the servants, that other people's burdens are not a concern of ours. As we try and take a bit more initiative, we try and be a bit proactive in connecting with one another and staying in touch, encouraging one another and being prayerful. I wonder if there's a lesson here for us, that there isn't a job that is beneath us, that there isn't a member of our church who isn't worthy of sharing in the burden. There's a responsibility for us. He goes on to encourage us to test ourselves, to take a look at our actions which reveal the truth of our hearts. When Paul tells us that we can take pride in ourselves, it's about taking pride based on God at work in us, rather than taking pride by comparing ourselves to somebody else. We want to do what Paul talks about in verse 2, where we fulfill the law of Christ. What could he mean by that? I thought Jesus was all about grace, not law. Well, when the New Testament authors talk to us about the law of Christ, they're trying to direct us back to the commands that Jesus gave, particularly the command to love one another as a core marker of disciples of Jesus. This would be something that the disciples would be well known for. And I do hope that for those of you who are gathering together, you know how much the people who meet with you love you, who want to serve you, who want to help carry your burdens. In the same way that as we get in touch with one another, you'll know that that phone call or that text or that message is sent in love, that we do care for one another and long to serve one another and help one another. Very rarely are there physical burdens, although there may be at this time. There may be particular gardening burdens that's too much for someone to carry, and we need to be offering to help with that. There may be emotional burdens where people are feeling anxious, troubled, distressed, and upset, isolated and alone. Where people have those sorts of burdens, we should be offering to help. And if we have those kind of burdens and it's time to share them, we really need to let people know. We need to be proactive in asking for help. Quite often, one of the limiting things for us is that we fail to ask. As James says, you don't have because you don't ask. This is a really helpful thing for us, but it does eat away at our pride. We want to look like we can manage ourselves. But here in Galatians 6, it's quite clear that our responsibility is to help one another. We can't do it on our own. Even as we test ourselves and check that we're keeping the law of Christ, it's appropriate in verse 5 for us to bear our own load. This is the kind of picture where it's appropriate, say, for a forklift to carry a load, or for a boat to carry its appropriate load. That is, this is not a command for you to abandon responsibility for things, to hand them off to people, to think that you're giving away that burden and giving it to someone else so that you have an easier time. No, that's a bit too individualistic, isn't it? It's actually more appropriate to feel like we're teaming up, that the burden is shared, that you carry it and you invite others to help you with carrying it. That just as you offer to help someone else, so it'll be your turn eventually to also receive help. Perhaps with the people you're meeting with, or if you're texting someone during this message to talk to them about what's being said and what you're learning, could you share one thing that you might need help with? That's not a request that you definitely want help right away, but maybe if we just practice asking for help to one another and indicating what it is that is a burden for us just now, that actually it would be really good to share that responsibility.